Hello there, Path Sharma this side, bringing you chess classics in which I'm covering top 15 games played by Vishwanathan Anand. Our countdown has reached to number 3, and the game that I would be looking at is his first immortal game, and this game was against Sergei Karjakin from Wijk 2006, the round 1 game of the Wijk tournament. And in this game, Karjakin is white, and Karjakin was 16 years old, very young grandmaster. He became grandmaster at the age of 12, by the way, and still holds the record of being the world's youngest grandmaster ever. And the 16-year-old Karjakin was facing Vishy Anand here, who was an experienced player. I mean, he was Anand was grandmaster before he was born, or before Magnus and many others who are dominating today's chess scene were born. So Anand was, I would say, a veteran of chess. So it would be very nice to see how the young Karjakin would cope up with Anand. So this was the game, and Anand is black, Karjakin is white, and Karjakin opens with pawn to e4, and we go to the knight off. So I jump to knight off, and you can see this is Sicilian knight off. And by the way, I was watching today's Chess Base India stream between Sagar Shah and Daniel King, and Daniel King, of course, was a good expert in knight off. He beat Anand with knight off in 1993. So that would have been one of the greatest achievements that Grandmaster Daniel King ever had. So this is the game. This is the knight off. Very famous chess opening. Bobby Fischer, Garry Kasparov, and now Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. Who knows? MVL is up to now at the top of FIDE candidates tournament. If he qualifies and challenges Magnus and become world champion, or another knight off child became world champion, that would be. So anyway, bishop to e3, the English attack, and black can go with anti-English by playing knight to g4, and that position is also very respectable, and there are many variants in knight off, but Anand goes for this e5 and knight to b3, and knight off being a very respectable opening amongst the chess players. It's pretty evident that a lot of research would have been put in playing knight off. Pawn to f3, bishop to e7. This is all standard stuff. And queen to d2. This has been played many times by one of the great knight off practitioners, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. So if you check his all knight off games, these kind of structures you will find in plethora. Anand castles, a long castle by Karjakin, knight b2 d7, and now pawn to g4. So this is the attack that white usually looks at towards black, and we are at move 11, and this is all now established theory. But in 2006, this was I would say brand new line where not much extensive analysis was put into this variation of knight off. Now g4, threat is to play pawn to g5 and tucking back knight, and to push h4 and h5 also. So black tries its own counter attack by playing pawn to b5, pawn to g5, b4. So pawn takes knight, and if pawn takes bishop, then pawn takes queen with check. Very careful indeed. So you have to move the knight, and knight goes back to e2. And black tucks back its knight to e8. And funnily enough, Peter Swittler played this position against Vallejo Pons in Amber 2004, and Vallejo Pons won a very beautiful game indeed. Probably one of the treats to watch. And in that game, Swittler played king to b1, And after a5, knight b to c1, a4, f4, e takes f4, and Anand also faced this position as black against Zoltan Almasi in Turin Olympiad 2006, where Anand played knight takes f4, but in the game between Sudler and Vallejo pawns, Sudler played bishop takes f4 and lost, whereas Anand playing knight takes f4, the game ended in a draw, which meant that Anand must have analyzed this position in a great depth. In the game, f4 was played by Karjakin, and again we are following the same theory. It's funny enough how grandmasters in these days now repeat the variations as deep as move 14. We are at move 14 now. Pawn to a5, f5, and you can see this bishop is somewhat trapped. It has only one square. If he wants to, it can go to c4, but then knight to g3, exchanging this bishop, and suddenly h4, h5 coming. These three pawns will wreak havoc towards black's king side. So it's prudent enough to keep pushing your pawns by playing pawn to b4. And there was a game between Fabiano Caruana and Boris Gelfand from Tal Memorial 2013, and in that game Caruana played f takes e6, and after a takes b3, c takes b3, f takes e6, Gelfand won an awesome game, another game, and I would say another treat to watch. That fantastic game between Fabiano Caruana and Gelfand. Gelfand won that game, probably one of his best games. And as you can see, if this knight is also trapped, if this knight goes to a1, then bishop takes a2, and suddenly black would be in charge. So he knows that this knight doesn't belong there, but rather it's better to give that knight off by playing knight b to d4, because this bishop is also trapped. And if bishop takes a2, for instance, then b3, and suddenly this bishop can get trapped. Or even bishop takes a2, then you can even play knight to c6, and you will lose one of the pieces. So that's why very important to keep a check. So pawn takes knight, knight takes d4, as I say, bishop takes, then knight c6, and you lose one of the pieces. Pawn to b3, this is a very sensible move by Anand, realizing that this bishop isn't going anywhere. So if pawn takes, then you can take on a2, and this pawn will eventually queen, and that you don't want that to happen. So understandably, Karjakin plays king to b1. Now b takes c2 check, knight takes c2, and how do you give this trapped bishop? By playing bishop to b3. Because if you take the pawn on a2, then king takes a2, and now a3, then white plays b3, and suddenly your own pawn has become a bit of a barrier who doesn't allow black to get a standard breakthrough, and white king has shielded itself with the help of this black pawn. It's incredible. And after king takes a2, if you don't play a3, let's say you play knight to e5, then h4 is tremendous. And let's say if you play queen to b8, then knight to d4, and suddenly I would say white is in a hot seat. h5, h6 coming, I would say the pawn storm on the king side would be too hot to handle. So understandably, after knight takes c2, Anand plays bishop b3, giving up the bishop this way, but it allows something brilliant to happen. A takes b3, a takes b3, and now look at this open file. This is a heaven for a rook, I would say. And if you're able to put your queen or maybe another rook into this file, then that would be, I would say, the end for white. Knight to a3 was played to close out this file. Knight to e5. Now trying to activate this knight, and in a good world try to prepare knight c4, but white continues his own attack. by playing pawn to h4. And again we are at move number 22. This is all very well known theory. In one game, Swidler actually won Whaley twice against Swidler in 2008, and in 2007 played rook to a4, and Swidler played queen to c3 in 2008. That game ended in a draw. Swidler played rook to h3 in 2007. That also ended in a draw. And Alexei Shirov in Wijk 2007 played queen to g2, and he lost that game to Lukwen Whaley. So you can see we are at move number 22, how deep the research had went into this game. And this game, by the way, was played in 2006, and those three games that I've shown, two of Swidler and one of Shirov, was played in 2007 and 2008 respectively. So you can see how much depth the grandmasters have put in this game. Anand went rook to a5, and again this position is played by Peter Lecko. I would say Vallejo Pons, as black played this against Peter Lecko, and Peter Lecko in this position with white went queen to e2, and that game was also in a draw. And also this was in Amber 2005. In 2004, Amber Swidler played that game, but that game was left far back, and that became totally different game after move 13. Now we are at move 23. So you can see how much depth they must have gone. So it's pretty obvious that Vallejo Pons had played this twice against two Peters, one against Peter Swidler in Amber 2004 and against Peter Lecko in Amber 2005. So it was quite evident that Karjakin must have studied this line extensively, because he's going into this, he must be knowing everything inside out, but still he plays queen to c3 in this position. Queen to b4 might have been the best try, and after queen to a8 then comes bishop to b6, rook a4 is forced. You can play rook a6 as well, but then after queen takes b3, rook a4, rook a6, you play queen takes b3 anyway, but here you can even take on e4, but the best would be knight to d7, and I don't see how black will attack without pawn on b3. Might have been a better try, queen to b4. Karjakin plays queen to c3. Anand continues his plan by playing queen to a8, and this is a very critical moment. Karjakin had to keep initiative going. Karjakin should have played pawn to f6 in this position, and after gf6, gf6, bishop f6, rook g1 check, because you want to save yourself from this fork. So this is a very good intermediate move, and now you can, let's say, play rook takes d6 as well. And again, it's very difficult to find where the next wave of attack is coming from black, I would say. f6 must have been a better move in this position. Instead, Karjakin was worried about this fork, as you can see, and he plays bishop to g2, and it turns out to be a fatal error. I will give you some time, take a pause and think what incredible move Anand played in this position. Well, if you found it out, that's awesome. And if you just want to enjoy the show, knight to c7, sacrificing the knight, fantastic move indeed. The evaluation says -7 in this position. If you plug it in for, let's say, for a minute or for 2 minutes, but if you plug it in immediately, it shows +3. This is a free knight, and indeed is a free knight. You have to do it because this rook is somewhat locked, and there's open c file for this king. If ever there comes a wave of attack through a file, then king c1, and suddenly this king escapes. So you have to lure this knight. It's already threatening knight to b5 in this position, and it's a tremendous blow indeed to Karjakin, and he has nothing better actually to take the knight to free this rook. Now here if you go for an attack and let's say play rook takes a3, then pawn takes, queen takes a3, you are threatening this, but rook d2 defends everything on the second rank, and knight c4 is actually not possible. The queen would simply gobble up, or if you play rook to a8 threatening queen a1 mate, then bishop d4 saves the day for white and actually wins the game for white, defending the mate on a1. And after queen takes a3, actually you can play queen to a7, and that would also be a job well done. But here again comes another brilliant move by Anand. Take a pause and think what he played in this position. Well, if you found it out, that's brilliant, and it looks like I might have given the hint away, because if there is a wave of attack coming through a file, then king can escape through c file, and what you have to do is to lock that option away from this white king, and you place rook to c8, giving up your bishop. And probably the best idea here was to go into a little bit of a worse endgame by taking the rook on a5. Black would be winning that even that surely, but it would be a tough task for black to win. Karjakin takes on e7, and now knight to c4, just going after the attack. Knight cannot move because of rook a1 mate, because notice the rook on c8 covers the c file. There is no escape route. g6 played by Karjakin. It was found out that bishop c5 might have been a better option, but that's a free piece given away. And if you let's say take the pawn with the f pawn, then tables will turn immensely after f6, and suddenly it's white who is having the upper hand in this position. So understandably, Anand takes the pawn with h pawn, and after f takes, well, I have to give this. What happens if white plays f6 now? Now you can take on a3, and after b takes a3, there is no defense to either of these checkmates, or even queen a2 and queen c2 is also threatened. This would be game over. So after h takes g6, f takes g6, very important move. And now you have to remove this defender. Knight takes a3, pawn takes a3 is forced, that's the only move. And now rook takes a3. Now black is threatening to play rook a1 and queen a2 mate. So you have to go through consecutive series of checks, but black, I would say white, would run out of that. G takes f7, check, and it's very important to play king h8. Even king h8 would still be winning for black, still there would be, but the task would be a little bit difficult then in that case. So playing safe, king h7, notice this pawn actually blocks this bishop's way of checking here. So that's a tough thing, and now you have to under promote the pawn to a knight to check, because there is a constant threat of rook a1, queen a2, rook takes, and now queen takes f8. You're giving up this queen, And now the next series of moves are somewhat forced because this rook is actually not here. So this opens the c file, but it's black to move, by the way. Rook a1 check, king b2, and if you let's say go queen a2, then actually king c3 and this king escapes, and they would via king d3 or king e2 and so on. So rook a2 check is the best bet in this position, and you cannot take the pawn, by the way, because then queen a4 check and the ladder mate will be the game over. So king c3, king b1 might have been a better try, but even that would also have ensured mate. There's no defense absolutely now. Queen a5 check, king d3, queen b5 check, king d4, rook to a4 check, king c3. Now this is a very tricky moment. If you play any nonsensical check, then king b2 and suddenly this king escapes miraculously. And once black runs out of check, then it would be white's turn to give some perpetual checks and to draw the game. There is always a perpetual if there are no checks. So Karjakin, even though he's losing, he's putting Anand into a very tricky situations. Another tricky situation this is. So I would give some time, take a pause and think the final nail in the coffin. The only move which wins for black in this position. Well, for the final time in this video, if you found it out, that's brilliant. And let's see how Anand finished it off. Queen c4 check, and if king b2, then queen c2 will be mate, and here Karjakin resigned the game. If king d2, then rook a2 check, king e1, and queen e2 is checkmate. As it turned out, queen c4 check. Wow, look at the material that white has in this position. He has two bishops and an extra rook in this position, and yet he finds his king into checkmate, probably in a checkmate. This is one of Anand's greatest games that I have ever seen. Stands at number 3. The first time this Anand's Immortal was played, and superb game against Sergei Karjakin. Well, I hope you liked the video. I hope you liked my analysis. Tomorrow I would be bringing Anand's game at number 2 spot. So till then, thanks for watching. Stay safe. Cheers. Bye.